Okay, Mr. Brown, we're in the process of conducting your preliminary hearing for this morning. If you could state your full name for the record.
Mr. Watkins, Your Honor.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Watkins.
My full name? I'm sorry. Jamani Ramon Watkins Carter.
Okay, and are you currently represented by Attorney Joe Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you're able to see him on the camera, correct?
No.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed forward, Attorney Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to some of the preliminary stuff, not the whole thing, but I'm gonna go back a little bit for the benefit of Mr. Watkins being present.
Thank you.
Detective Rosas, were you working as a detective on April 2nd, 2022?
I was.
And did you respond to a incident at 5432 River Station?
I did.
And is that in Clayton County?
It is.
Okay. And what was the nature of the call?
We received a person shot call at that location.
And when you arrived on scene, what did you find?
Upon arrival, I observed a young black male unresponsive in front of the barbershop.
Were you able to speak to any witnesses on scene?
His mother and a couple of the barbers.
When you say his mother, are you referring to the deceased mother?
Yes, I'm sorry.
And who did you identify that deceased victim as?
Anthony McLean.
Okay. And what did Miss McLean tell you when you spoke with her?
She advised she had just left the barbershop approximately 10 minutes prior to the altercation taking place. And she received a phone call from her barber stating that something bad had happened and she needed a return.
Were you able to speak to any other barbers on scene that may have witnessed anything that took place?
We were not able to obtain any information from the barbers on scene. They all advised they didn't know what occurred.
Were you able to observe any type of surveillance video?
Yes, Ms. McLean was assisting us with that.
And what did you observe in the surveillance video?
Initially, we did not observe much. Her video captures in segments. So I did have to ultimately obtain a search warrant to get the videos.
And that search warrant, were you able to obtain that search warrant that day?
To my recollection, I don't think that day, maybe the next day. She forwarded us some of the videos, but just so I can ensure I had the entire video of the incident, a search warrant was obtained.
And so when did you have a chance to completely watch the surveillance?
I don't recall the exact date, but it was within a couple of days of the incident occurring.
When you had a chance to watch the surveillance, what did you observe?
I did observe in the video a group of males arriving in two sets of cars. One of the males was identified to be Mr. Watkins. He enters the barbershop with one male, confronts the barber known as Chill, and begins to physically assault him inside of the barbershop.
Okay. And after the physical altercation inside the barbershop takes place, what's the next set of events on the video that you observe?
Mr. Watkins and his friend proceed to leave. It looks like I guess they forget something or make a mention of keys, and then they go back to the barbershop, where shortly after Mr. Watkins is seen running from the location. People start to jump in cars and leave. Then one of the vehicles that was accompanying him come back, and Mr. Watkins and two other males exit the vehicle and start shooting towards the barbershop.
So let me go back. So you said Mr. Watkins is seen on video running from the location.
Yeah, so he first walks towards the location after I believe he makes a statement like, "Where's my keys?" or something. Walks towards the location, and then shortly after runs away.
And start right there. when he begins to run, are you able to determine what causes him to run away?
No, what the outside camera doesn't capture at the entrance of the barber shop. So that's a dead spot. I was not able to get footage from to see what occurred at that moment.
All right. So after Mr. Watkins runs away, did you testify that you saw him get into a vehicle?
Yes.
And did he leave?
He left, the vehicle came back, and Mr. Watkins and 2 other passengers exit the vehicle and begin to shoot towards the barber shop.
Approximately how much time had passed between when Mr. Watkins left and when he came back to the barber shop?
To my recollection, it wasn't more than 2 to 3 minutes.
And when Mr. Watkins came back with those 2 other males, you testified that you saw them shooting towards the barber shop?
Yes.
And is that how the deceased victim was struck?
That's not clear. If that is when the deceased got shot, because I don't know what occurred in the front of the building when Mr. Watkins originally walks up.
So Mr. Watkins, when he came into the barbershop the first time, did you see him having any firearms on this person at that point?
No, not that I
But
was
the
able to
second time, you saw him with a firearm shooting toward the barbershop.
Yes, and I apologize. Before he went back to the barbershop for his keys, there was some sort of exchange between him and one of the passengers. It appeared that he did have a firearm at that time. So the second time he was walking to the barbershop, he did appear to have a firearm.
All right. Just prior to shooting at the barbershop.
Yes.
All right. Did you notice any damage to any of the neighboring businesses at the barbershop?
Yes, there was damage to the barbershop as well as to the Wayfields, a store, and I believe it's like a hair salon, a hair braiding salon within the same plaza.
And were you able to determine the damage to those locations would be that of $500 or greater?
I believe it was estimated greater than $500.
How were you able to identify Mr. Watkins as the person on video? How were you able to identify him as the person on the video?
Later on that night, while we were still at the barber shop, our dispatch did notify us there was a walk-in victim at Piedmont Henry, I believe, of a gunshot wound, who advised it occurred at that location. That victim was William Ralston, which is the barber known as Chill.
And did you have a chance to identify Mr. Ralston?
Yes, he did come in to the police headquarters for an interview after he was discharged.
And what did Mr. Ralston advise you took place at the barbershop?
He advised that he knew the person who had done this and identified him as Jamani Watkins. Stated Jamani owed him $900. I guess Jamani had been dodging him for the money. And so he met with Jamani's mother, made a comment. And shortly after, Jamani reached out to him saying he didn't have to tell his mother that. Mr. Ralston then states, I'm done talking with you. Just come to the shop, pay me my money. And which Jamani does go to the shop on the day in question and physically assaults him. Mr. Ralston did have visible injuries.
So Mr. Ralston is the person Mr. Watkins is seen fighting or punching inside the barbershop in the video that you observed?
Yes.
In that video you observed Mr. Watkins throw the first punch?
Yes.
And you said that Mr. Ralston had visible injuries to his face as a result of the fight?
Yes.
After Mr. Ralston told you that Mr. Watkins came to the barbershop, what else events did he tell you took place?
He stated that after he was assaulted by Mr. Watkins, they proceed to leave. He said he went out to the back of the location. He did advise us he did have a firearm. He makes his way to the front of the location, and that is where Anthony, the deceased victim, was standing outside. He says as soon as he stepped outside, he heard 2 gunshots and he shot back.
Mr. Ralston advised that he shot once he heard 2 gunshots. Did he advise you who he shot at?
No.
After he said he fired the first, though his return fire, did he identify who was firing when he heard the first 2 shots?
No, he did not identify who shot the 2.
Nor did he identify who he was shooting at?
No.
After he returned fire, what did he advise you he did then?
He advised, then several gunshots were heard. He continues to shoot back, excuse me, and that is when he gets shot in the thigh and runs to retreat to the back of the building.
And when he was giving gunfire toward whomever was shooting at him, was the deceased victim standing near him?
Yes, he says the deceased victim was already outside. He didn't know it was him at the time. But as soon as he stepped out of the barbershop, that's when he heard the 2 gunshots. And from his peripheral vision, he was able to see whoever that was dropped to the ground. He didn't know if they were injured or not, or if they were just ducking for cover. Then he returned the 2 shots.
Did Mr. Ross never advise you that he saw Mr. Watkins firing at him?
No.
But he did advise, but you were able to determine in your investigation that he had just been in a fight with him moments prior to the shooting, and you saw video of Mr. Watkins shooting towards the barbershop.
Yes.
Along with 2 other males.
Yes.
When did you subsequently obtain arrest warrants for Mr. Watkins?
I'm sorry?
You subsequent to that obtained arrest warrant for Mr. Watkins?
Yes.
Was the deceased pronounced deceased on scene, or did he die at the hospital?
He was pronounced deceased on scene.
And his manner of death, his cause of death, was it by a gunshot wound?
Yes, sir.
I think that's all the questions I have of you at this time, Detective. I'm sure Mr. Brown may have some up here as well.
Okay.
Your witness, Attorney Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Rosas, did I understand that you testified that the video does not make it clear who shot Mr. McLean?
That's correct. There is a dead spot in the video.
Okay. And so your evidence as to who shot Mr. McLean comes solely from Mr. Ralston?
And there is evidence of Mr. Watkins shooting from a vehicle, I'm sorry.
Yes, the video, there's some video of him shooting at the barbershop, but as far as who shot Mr. McLean, that evidence comes solely from Mr. Ralston?
Mr. Ralston didn't testify that it was Mr. Watkins. He only identified Mr. Watkins as the person who assaulted him, and the other males in that group were there accompanying Mr. Watkins.
So who identified my client, Mr. Watkins, as the one who shot Mr. McLean?
No one has Mr. Ralston identified him as the person who assaulted him. But there is video evidence showing that Mr. Watkins did shoot at some point.
But no one identifying that he actually shot Mr. McLean. Is that correct? Okay. And you testified that Mr. Ralston was owed money by my client, about $900. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Ralston was would it be correct to say that he was pressuring my client to repay this money?
Yes, you could say that.
Could you maybe even threatening my client to repay this money?
Objection. There's been no testimony that any threats was made between Mr. Ralston or Mr. Watkins.
I believe the testimony was that Detective Rosas says that Mr. Ralston said, "You need to get on over here." You know, I believe
that's not a threat. That's not a threat.
Okay, sustain.
Okay, all right. In the arrest warrants, one of the warrants, number 2022 CW 52765, it says that 3 males, to include Jaimani, exit the vehicle and begin shooting multiple times. But in the arrest warrant 2022 CW 52767, it says that let's see, physically assaulted William Roston inside the location and then shooting him from a bluish gray vehicle, possibly a Chevrolet Malibu. Can you confirm whether he was allegedly inside this vehicle or outside the vehicle when the shooting allegedly took place?
When the shooting happened, Mr. Watkins is observed exit, so he doesn't fully come out the vehicle. You see 3 of the 4 doors open and 3 passengers come outside. So they're partially in and out of the vehicle, but they do step out from the vehicle and shoot towards the barbershop.
Okay. Now, pursuant to your investigation, was any evidence obtained determining whether Mr. Roston, William Roston, sold drugs?
Objection, relevance.
It goes to the pressure that Mr.
But no
Roston,
pressure has been established, Mr. Brown.
Okay, I'm gonna,
I withdraw the question.
okay.
And does the video inside the barbershop confirm that it was actually Mr. Watkins who threw the first punch?
Yes.
Does the video confirm whether Mr. Watkins is wearing brass knuckles? Because that's in the warrant.
No, per Mr. Roston's testimony, he advised that it is believed that Mr. Watkins may have had an object he associated with brass knuckles, because he felt like it was a hard object that was striking him, in which he did have to get several stitches on his head from his injuries.
Were brass knuckles obtained by the police?
No.
Okay. So there's a dead spot as far as this video, as far as showing the beginning, the entrance of the barbershop. Is that correct?
It's from the outside angle. Yeah, there is a dead spot where it did not capture. And from Mrs. McLean's video camera, it didn't capture any motion at that time.
So it could be possible that Mr. Roston is in this dead spot, pointing a weapon at my client prior to my client shooting.
I can't testify to that. I don't know what occurred during that time.
During the dead spot, okay. Is the police investigation ongoing?
I'm sorry, you cut off.
I'm sorry. Is the police investigation ongoing?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, this video, does it have audio also?
The outside video does, the inside doesn't.
The inside does not have audio.
Correct.
So the outside, so the first shot that's fired, is it confirmed that the first shot that is heard was from my client's weapon?
No, because Mr. Watkins is running away at that time.
Okay, so it's not even confirmed that he even fired first.
That's correct. I can't testify that is correct or not.
Okay. So I just want to recap. So no one has identified Mr. Watkins as a person who shot Mr. McLean.
No, just of him being a part of that group that did shoot back.
Just that he is seen firing a weapon.
Yes.
And also, it's not even confirmed that he fired first.
Yes, that's not confirmed.
Okay. How many people exited the vehicle with along with my client?
When they first arrive, it's two cars. I believe Mr. Watkins had two passengers with him, and there was another two or three in the other vehicle. But when he is seen running away from the barbershop and gets picked up by the blue vehicle, it's three people to include him.
How many, as per the video, how many people are seen firing weapons?
Three.
Okay. So it could have been one of the other two that fired the weapon that shot Mr. McLean.
That were accompanying Mr. Watkins. I mean, possibly.
Okay. Have those other two been identified?
No.
Has anybody else been arrested pursuant to this this case?
No, currently there haven't been any other arrests.
That's all the questions that I have, Your Honor. Thank you, Detective Rosas.
Thank you.
Attorney Mitchell, do you have any redirect?
Just briefly, Judge, I just want to clean a couple things up. So, Detective, you testified that Mr. Watkins is seen running away from the incident. And I believe, as counsel was trying to point out, that Mr. Roston may have been firing at Mr. Watkins initially, correct? And you saw him running away.
Correct.
When you saw him run away, did you testify that he got into a vehicle and left the incident?
Yes.
So even if Mr. Roston fired at Mr. Watkins first, when he got in the vehicle and left the incident, at that point, he would have been out of harm's danger?
Objection. This is a leading question.
I agree. Sustain.
All right. So let me rephrase that. When Mr. Watkins, when you observed Mr. Watkins get into the vehicle and leave, was shots still being fired at him?
No.
Did you see anybody run out in the parking lot shooting at the car?
No.
And he approximately how long was he gone from the incident location?
2 to 3 minutes, if that.
And in those 2 to 3 minutes while he was gone, was anyone still firing?
No.
Would it be fair to say that if someone was firing at him, the threat was gone?
That's correct.
Okay. I have no more questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you have any other witnesses? Attorney
No, Your
Mitchell?
Honor. I don't.
Okay. Thank you. Attorney Brown, do you have any witnesses?
I don't, Your Honor.
You say you don't?
I do not, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay, then we're ready for closings. Or summations?
Yes, sir.
Well, yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, my client has not been identified as the shooter. I know that the proof level for probable cause is very low, but I think, well, I know that identity is something that has to be proven by the state. My client, it hasn't been determined who shot first. At the trial, were this to go to trial, my client is going to assert that he was acting in self-defense, that Mr. Roston fired first. It came out the barbershop with his gun firing at my client, and that he fired back in self-defense. But identity hasn't been established. So I moved to dismiss.
Okay, you're moving to dismiss all the charges?
I moved to dismiss the murder charge.
Okay. And then with respect to the other charges?
Okay, the aggravated assault charges, the prosecutor, the detective testified that the video, which I don't have a copy of, obviously at this point, but the video allegedly shows that my client threw the first punch. I would like to see the video, but I know that that's enough to establish probable cause, so I can't dispute that. And the possession of a firearm during the commission of a, let's see, possession of a firearm during the commission or attempt to commit certain felonies. I think, well, certainly the detective testified that my client was in possession of a firearm, so I can't argue, I can't make a motion to dismiss that, but the murder charge, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. ADA Mitchell, if you could address the defense counsel request to dismiss the murder charge based on the facts as in your summation as well as the other charges.
Absolutely, Your Honor. Absolutely. So, Your Honor, we heard testimony from Detective Rosa. She testified that when she arrived on scene, what she saw, what she observed a surveillance video that showed that initial encounter with Mr. Watkins and Mr. Roston. Mr. Watkins striking him, a fight ensued between the two. Then after that, the video showed Mr. Watkins leaving the barbershop. At some point, Mr. Roston went outside the barbershop. And in the testimony, Your Honor, as it seems to be going as if there may have been a shot fired by Mr. Roston towards Mr. Watkins. Detective Rosa has also testified that she observed him in the video get inside of a vehicle and leave the scene for approximately 2 to 3 minutes. At some point, she testified that on the video, you see Mr. Watkins come back, he and 2 other males exit the vehicle and fire shots at and towards the building, at which time she testified, based on her conversation with Mr. Roston, Mr. Roston saw the deceased victim fall to the ground, at which time he returned fire as well. The shots that was fired between Mr. Watkins and his 2 co-defendants was towards the buildings where the barbershop was, as well as the other businesses where they're seen on video firing in that location. So the law he doesn't have to be the primary person whose bullet struck the deceased, because he's engaged in that felony act of aggravated assault and firing at that building. If his bullet or his co-defendant did it, he's equally responsible. Given the possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime charge, he's observed on video with a firearm firing, i.e. with the ag assault. The murder is a byproduct of the aggravated assault. And the criminal damage to property, she testified that she was able to see damage to not only the barbershop, but neighboring businesses as well. And those businesses damage came to an approximately $500 or greater. So, Your Honor, the state believes that the low burden of that we would have to cover has been established based on Detective Rojas' testimony. We'll ask the court to find that there has been sufficient testimony that there is probable cause and bound these charges over to Superior Court.
Okay. Now, Attorney Mitchell, with respect to the murder charge, do you know why the other suspects have not been identified, or?
So, Judge, at this point, to my understanding, there isn't any identifiable information that we've been able to determine up to this point of who those other 2 shooters are. They weren't identified by Mr. Roston as knowing the name of those shooters. He was able to identify Mr. Watkins as the person he had a direct connection to. He had given him money. He had an outstanding debt. He came into the barbershop, they fought, as well as moments later, he has seen firing. So he has a direct connection with Mr. Watkins. However, those other 2 assailants haven't been determined. However, if Mr. Watkins wants to identify who he was with, that'll help the investigation as well.
Okay, Mr. Attorney Brown, is something your client would be willing to do, identify the other suspects or felons that was with him at the time of the incident?
I couldn't answer that at this time, Your Honor. I would have to discuss that with my client. Okay. But yeah, I definitely couldn't answer that, especially since I'm in my office and he's at the jail.
Okay.
But Your Honor, because this is an open investigation, anytime Mr. Brown has information that he'd like to come to the DA's office, we'll be more than willing to have a sit down and a conversation with Mr. Brown.
You understand that, Mr. Brown? That would probably facilitate if that's your defense. You understand?
I definitely understand that, and I will, after discussing with my client as far as what he desires, I will be happy to have a sit down with Mr. Mitchell.
Okay. Okay, well, based on the evidence presented to the court today, I do find that there's sufficient probable cause to bind over all charges with respect to Mr. Walken to Superior Court of Clayton County. And that will be the order of the court today. And I want to thank you, Attorney Brown, for your presentation of your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. Pleasure being in your courtroom.
Okay, thank you.
That was my only case. May I be excused?
Yes, thank you for your patience this
Thank you.
morning.
No problem. No problem at all. Thank you.
Your Honor, I heard the deputy say that they had Mr. Purdue. Can I have one moment to just reach out to my officer to let them know we're ready?
Yes,
Her testimony. Give me 1 minute. Thank you, please.
okay. And I believe that's Attorney Pleasant too, correct?
I'm not exactly sure if Ms. Pleasant announced that was her client.
That is my client, Your Honor, and this is a 2-officer case.
I thought you said that, so they're gonna be seeking a, I don't think we have the other.
I don't think.
Judge, I just got the other officer's number from Officer Edwards. I just forwarded that to Eddie Mitchell. If you can give us a couple minutes, we'll try to see if we can reach Officer James. Like I said, from looking at the calendar, I can't tell, or it's not noted on the calendar if a subpoena went out to Officer James. But if you can give me a moment.
On my end either, so I'm
This
assuming no.
this is the third time this case has been on the calendar,
Right,
Judge.
and it is just, but if you can give me a second,
Okay,
I'm going to try to reach Officer James at the number that Officer Edwards just forwarded me,
okay,
and see if we can get him to log on.
okay,
I do
thank
see
you.
other officers on the calendar. If they need to proceed with something else while they do that, I don't want this to be a holdup.
And Officer Ward, Officer Ward was on Xavier Robbins. That's a consent bond, and so can that officer be excused?
Okay, that's an update. Okay, let's see.
Yes. And so as soon as Your Honor looks at that, if Officer Ward can be excused, and Detective Rowe is actually on one of those cases.
What case was that, Ms. Freeman?
Mercedes Ward is on Xavier Robbins.
Okay, Robbins. I know you text me, you put that in the chat about that one.
Right, and I just wanted to make sure that Officer Ward could be excused.
Okay, yeah, I think I said yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Officer Ward. You can be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. And Detective Rowe is actually on a case with multiple co-defendants, and I believe Your Honor continued that case to September 26th, but I didn't want to excuse Detective Rowe until I made sure. And Detective Rowe is actually on the case with, let me find which one. I think